Question. I'm Iain Dale. On the show, we have a great panel with us tonight. We have Christine Jardine to my left, Liberal Democrat MP for Edinburgh West. She's the party's Cabinet Office Women and Equalities and Scotland spokesperson. That must keep you a bit busy. We have next to her Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, Conservative peer, former chair of the British Joint Intelligence Committee and also former Security Minister. Welcome to you, Pauline. To my right, Njambi McGrath is a comedian and actor. She's got a new Netflix film out later this month, I think. Am I right?
No.
Forget I said that.
It's a comedy special on Next Up, not Netflix.
Oh, not Netflix, right?
Yeah,
okay.
Next Up.
No, I have no idea what Next Up is.
Yeah.
And she also presents a podcast called Colonial Herstory. David Buik, very familiar voice to you on LBC, businessman and financial commentator who hosts the global original podcast Money with David Buik and Michael Wilson. Well, they're here to answer your questions. So the idea is that you phone in on 0345 6060 973 and ask them a question about whatever news issue takes your fancy, or it could be something that isn't particularly in the news. We often have the odd curveball thrown in from time to time. You can also watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Phil is in Canary Wharf. Phil, you're our first caller. What would you like to ask?
Hello. Good evening, Iain. Good evening, all. Thanks for having me on. It's just a quickie. Obviously, we've got the new illegal immigration bill going through the Commons currently as we speak. Well, it costs us £27.5 billion. Is it likely, or is it a good price to pay to stop small boats?
So, what's costing us £27.5 billion?
The new immigration bill.
That's news to me, I have to say. How will it cost £27.5 billion?
Well, we're giving Rwanda 120 million, plus 12,000 per asylum seeker, which is 124 million pounds for the 200 refugees that they're going to take. So therefore, if you extrapolate it out, we had 45,000 refugees or asylum seekers last year. So therefore, extrapolate it out, we need 225 countries that are going to have 225 Rwanda agreements.
I think you're drawing a few conclusions there that can't be justified. But anyway, let's leave that there. Pauline Neville-Jones, this illegal immigration bill that's going through the Commons, is it going to stop small boats, and will it cost a lot more money?
It'll cost some money. There's nothing any doubt about that. I personally think that the measure that were agreed with the French during the Prime Minister's visit to Paris the other day actually are going to be more effective in doing some stopping. It won't be quick because they've got to build a detention centre. But once you build a detention centre, you then have two things. You have a place to put people not in the UK. And secondly, you have potentially a place where you can interview them so they never come to the UK. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think that would be a real advance.
But when they're released from the detention centre, where do they go then?
Well, that is the $64,000 question.
Well, that's the weakness in the argument, isn't it?
No, but yes. But the idea, after all, is to break the model of people coming in little boats. And that will break that model if it's successful.
Well, if they were permanently in this detention centre, you could argue that. But if they're released from it, they could then still get on the boat.
Quite a lot of them are going to go back from where they came from. And one of the things that this measure ought to do is actually persuade people, if you live in Albania, there's no point in coming because you're going to go straight back. And a significant proportion of them are not from places where you can claim there's any kind of
That was true
reason.
in the last quarter of last year, but I think I'm right in saying that the number of Albanians is now dramatically reduced.
Yeah.
But if you come from Iran, you're not going to go back to Iran, are you?
No. And that's great. That's the great difficulty, is that a lot of the people actually do qualify. We will continue to take people. So the idea somehow that we're actually going to deny people who legitimately have a right to refuge is not the case. I personally am sceptical about the Rwanda bit. It's very small numbers. And I'm not sure in the end what it does to the overall.
The only deterrent value in Rwanda is if everybody was going to be sent there. Then you could even if you disagree with the policy, you could kind of understand that there would be a bit of a deterrent.
But there's a capacity problem, isn't there? It doesn't seem. The government has never said that it's going to take thousands.
Okay, Njambi.
No, it's not going to stop the boats because these are determined people. First of all, if you're going to be thinking of building detention centers to house people who are already so traumatized by war and putting them in detention centers. We've seen the detention centers that were funded by the EU in Libya. Those turned out to be horrendous and actually turned out to be places where people were actually being sold on the open market into slavery.
But that's not going to be the case in France.
It's not. Okay, from history, we know that detention centers, whether in this country, whether in France or anywhere, tend to be quite horrendous. And these are people who are traumatized by war. And the question we should be asking, why are these people escaping?
Yeah.
I remember in 2010, or was it 2012, sometime back, David Cameron coming to the nation asking whether he can go and bomb Syria. This is the result of that.
But we didn't.
I think we did.
No, we didn't.
No, we didn't.
No, Parliament was asked for permission to bomb Syria, and Parliament said no, and we never did it.
Okay.
I think you're talking about Libya.
Russia is and still bombing.
Okay, there's the war in Syria is actually a lot more complex because it's a proxy war.
Please.
I don't think it matters.
What you were talking about, I think, to help you out here, is Libya, not Syria.
Syria? Yes, I do actually remember the Syrian war. I do remember the Syrian war.
But I think what you're thinking of is the fact that David Cameron wanted permission to bomb Libya, Gaddafi, when they were trying to save 10,000 people from being murdered by Gaddafi in Benghazi.
But I'm not talking about the Libyan war. I know it's not the Libyan war I'm talking about the Syrian war. Somehow this nation has been involved in some of these places, and it's undeniable. And these
but we weren't involved in Syria. That's the point I'm trying to make, and you keep insisting that we were.
Okay. So where are these refugees coming from? They are coming from. Afghanistan. I seem to remember that the British were involved in Afghanistan.
Correct.
They're coming from Syria. They're coming from Sudan.
Iran.
And they're coming from Iran. And they're coming from, some of them, Eritrea. That's where they're coming from. Now, there's nobody who cannot say that these places are not places of war or places that are horrendous. Now, it takes so much, no matter what people here think, it takes so much for people to just walk away from their families, from their countries.
And they're going to come through a series of safe countries. There's no earthly reason why the UK should take them all.
So yes, do you think that they choose to actually risk their lives in a boat when there's a safe route? When there's a safe route,
they've come right across Europe before they ever got to the Channel.
Because some of them already have families here. Some of them have mothers. They have fathers in this country. And this is why they're coming here. And also, a lot of these people are coming from, so for example, the people from Afghanistan, some of them were working for the British forces when they were out there. Mm-hmm. And they were promised that they would be resettled. There was never any, a lot of them are having to come here because their lives are in danger because of the service that they provided for us. The way we are villainizing human beings is really cruel, and it doesn't reflect well on us. I know we're using the Australian model, and the Australian model is not one that anybody should be looking to emulate.
Christine.
I just come from the House of Commons, and we'll be voting on this later tonight, and what I hope to see is Conservative MPs examining their conscience ahead of this ahead of this bill, and vote against it, because it overrides previous exemptions that were given to unaccompanied children. And now we're going to see unaccompanied children, pregnant women, locked up in detention centres. This is going to criminalise,
it should be said that the majority,
but it's not
the overwhelming
targeting
majority of people coming on the boats are male.
None of us want to see people risking their lives in the Channel on small boats. We all want to see that end. But what this bill will do is it will criminalise those people and not the criminal gangs who are exploiting them and bringing them here and putting them in that dangerous situation. But we are not putting the money into tackling the problem at source. We should be making sure there are safe legal routes for them to go to various countries. And a lot of the people who come here come through France, come through other countries, because this is where their family is. This is where
So that's a never-ending stream of immigrants into this country.
Nobody is suggesting for a minute. I'm sorry, I let you finish. If you wouldn't mind letting me speak. Nobody is suggesting that we should have a never-ending stream of immigrants. But what we should be doing is abiding by our traditions, our honourable tradition in welcoming asylum seekers to this country. Because a lot of these people who will be turned back on boats, if they came here by another route, if we made safe legal routes for them to come here, would be entitled to have asylum in this country. And what we are doing is not investing the money that we are spending. I don't think the figure the chap gave us was right, but the money, the 500 million we're giving to France, we should be investing in North Africa and in the countries where people are coming to us through these small boats, to give them options, to try and improve the conditions in those countries. That's how we tackle this. We clamp down, we try to fight the gangs, and we give people options, and we help them to improve their lives. And we don't just say, no, you're not welcome here.
What do you think isn't being done at the moment in fighting these gangs? Because, I mean, I've always thought, surely the authorities know who these people are, so why don't they just arrest them and bang them up? But it clearly isn't as simple as that. So, I mean, if anybody's... I mean, this is one of Labour's... The only point that Labour really disagree with government policy on is saying putting more into the National Crime Agency to help them fight this. But then I'm thinking, well, surely they're doing all that they can do, and if there was more to be done, surely we would all know what that would be.
Well, one of the main problems is that more assistance from the French and other Europeans.
Well, I don't think we could keep blaming other people. I think one of the main problems is that we haven't invested the time, effort and the money in safe legal routes that we should have done. But at the basis of it all, we have an asylum system in this country which is broken and needs fixed. We have an immigration system which is broken and needs fixed. And that is what is causing people to come here. And these, it's one of the main reasons behind people coming here in boats and being the victims of these gangs, because there isn't a clear, legal, efficient system for people who are entitled to seek asylum to come here.
David Buik.
I've got a rather different approach from my colleagues here. My attitude is that the world has got 100 million people problem. It's not something that's peculiar to the United Kingdom. It's peculiar all over the world. And if we don't attack this from source, we're never going to get on top of it.
I agree.
I mean, to be honest, I think the 500 million that is being spent to France is, as far as I'm personally concerned, more symbolic for us to have a better relationship with the European Union and with France, which I think is a good idea.
Absolutely.
I don't think it's at all a good idea to just hand over because we're going to give you more police and the rest of it, because unless you pay for what is actually delivered, I don't really see the benefit of that. And I think, pushing forward that unless the world, whether it's the United Nations, whether it's the G7, the G20, I don't care, as long as it's a very powerful body, decides that they're going to tackle immigration on a global basis, and as you say, on a humane basis, we're never going to get anywhere.
Well, that's an interesting viewpoint. Alistair Campbell was saying something, and I know you'll love to agree with Alistair Campbell, David, but he was saying on his podcast today that that is the solution here for the entire world to say, well, look, if there's 100 million people that have been displaced and they're looking for somewhere else to go, well, let's each country make a commitment to take X number, which on the face of it sounds very sensible. I'm wondering, though, Christine, whether it's that simple.
Wouldn't it be better to have...
I said Christine.
I'm so sorry. I think she's had quite a bit of the time.
Pauline, you've continually interrupted Christine. We'll come back to you in a moment.
It's okay. I actually think there is merit in looking at it as a global problem and looking at how we fix this together, because, like I was saying, the money going to the places where there is a problem, investing in solving the problems there, because people are fleeing their countries, their homes, their families, everything they know and love, because they feel they have no other option. So I think if we could find a global solution to create other options for them to improve the situation where they are, or maybe agree that we will each take, a certain amount of refugees and organise it properly, have a system to safeguard people so they don't end up in the hands of criminal gangs.
Pauline, we are investing quite a lot of money in a lot of these countries through the development budget. But, I mean, nobody is going to suggest that throwing another £200 million at Sudan or Eritrea, for example, is actually going to help the problem in the short term, because you'd actually probably be giving it to a lot of the warlords indirectly.
Well, that's part of the issue, isn't it? You've got a short-term issue and you've got a longer-term issue. And I don't think anybody disagree around this table. The longer-term issue, I think it doesn't reside actually in helping some people come. It resides in investing in those countries so people can stay there in their own societies. And that does mean spending a lot of aid money. UK can't do it by itself.
No.
Therefore, you've got to have, a commitment from all rich DAC countries that they're going to do this. Then we'd start to get somewhere.
Njambi, final word from you.
Well, it's very difficult to have cooperation from the EU after we were so rude to the EU, and
we weren't. We left after a democratic vote.
Fair enough. But remembering what Liz Truss said about the relationship with the French, and before that, it was very cordial, and it does look as though Rishi Sunak is trying to go somewhat towards amending the relationship. It's really difficult when it seems like you've been antagonizing people, and yes, this is a global problem, but then we've got to go to the stem of the issue: wars. And we've got to look at the role that we play in these wars and the provision of arms to these countries. That does actually cause the problems that we're having right now. Just throwing money at this, to the French, it's not going to work. It's not going to stop the boats. And this is a very good policy for people to, as we're heading to the election, this, some people will look at this as the only policy that the current government has to fight the next general election on. And unfortunately, the most vulnerable people are being they've been thrown under the bus in order for a political statement to be made. It's completely unfair, and I would say cruel, because these are people who are genuinely traumatized. These are the law of the law. If you're going to pick on anybody, don't pick on somebody who has lost everything. These are people who've lost their families, their children. Despite what anybody says, there are children coming here. There are women, there are pregnant women. There are all sorts of people coming here. People keep saying that they are fighting age men. They're not fighting age men. And even if there are, they're probably coming here because they need to find a way of rescuing their families. It's what any father would do. And I think we really have to find the humanity in all of this, because a lot of this is being emulated by countries like Tunisia and other countries that are using the rhetoric that is being used here. They're using it in their own countries.
Just going back to Syria, we were both right. I was right. Yeah. I was right in 2013, but you were right in 2018.
I knew.
So apologies.
Yeah, that's okay. I knew.
David, I know you want to come back, but we're running very, very late. Forgive me if I don't come to you.
Yep.
We'll come to you on the next question, I can assure you. It's 19 minutes past 8.
LBC
22 minutes past 8 on LBC. We have with us Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, Conservative peer, Christine Jardine, Liberal Democrat MP, and Njambi McGrath, author and actor and comedian and podcaster. Are there no limits to your talents? Just tell us a little bit about your podcast, because it's got this rather fascinating title. I think you've created a word here, colonial herstory.
Yes, so the narrative is always from the side of the colonizer, but never from the colonized. So I decided to because coming from Kenya, our history is never told. It's always told from the British side. So I decided with my Canadian friend and comedian, excellent comedian, Nina Alexander, she's Black Canadian, that we should actually talk about our history. Why is she a Black Canadian? And so we started a podcast called Colonial Herstory, because it's from her perspective. And so we are looking at all the different areas. So today we were talking about Florida.
Why Florida in particular?
Because we have done Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a place where slaves were taken to restart their lives. We've done Cuba, we've done Jamaica, and all of them somehow seem to link off with what was happening in Florida.
Did you see that little video of the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, whose mother came from Sierra Leone?
Yeah.
And he was on an official visit there this week, and he went to visit a school, and he did this marvellous video with all the school children around him, sort of asking what they want to do when they grow up. It was actually quite heartwarming.
Yeah, I mean, so it really marks history, and loads of different places around the world are connected by the activities of the Europeans, starting from the 14th century.
Okay.
Yeah.
And David Buik is here, and he's got a podcast as well, which you don't even have to explain what it is, David, because it says so on the tin, doesn't it? Money with David Buik and Michael Wilson. What those two don't know about money.
Lots of people do.
If you'd accumulated a lot of it, you wouldn't be here, would you? You'd be sunning yourself in Barbados or somewhere.
It's derisory. But I love it.
Let's go to our next caller. It's Scott in West Hampstead. Hello, Scott.
Hello, good evening, and good evening, panel. My question is this. Was the 6-day Gary Lineker drama just a storm in a teacup, or a huge own goal for the BBC and for the Tory MPs who tried to get Gary sacked?
I'm hoping that at least two of you are football fans and that you're sort of distraught by what happened with Match of the Day, or maybe not. David Buik.
I'm a football fan, and I'm afraid I'm a member of the minority. Gary Lineker, as a presenter, is in a class of his own. I think he's fantastic. But there are rules. And the rules are that if you are employed by the BBC at a very senior level, then you must abide by them. And the fact remains that because the BBC's rules were ambiguous, that led to this problem. And I think it wasn't particularly well handled by Tim at all. I think it was very badly handled.
But I think Tim Davey, the
Director General. I think it's a pointless exercise, heart beating on this thing, incessantly going on about it, because to be honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, it's yesterday's stories and today's fish and chips. And we can sort of bang on about it for a long period of time. And it's not going to really satisfy anybody. I think what needs to be done, and I think what we've heard, is that Gary Lineker, if we could just see a tiny bit of humility, and it looks like we have, and if he agrees to the rules until an independent inquiry decides to change them sensibly, in my opinion, then, that should be enough. But I think to just go on about it, I mean, the quality of his rhetoric left a little bit to be desired, but I think it was... But he never mentioned the word Nazi, and I think we've used this opportunity, or the public has used this opportunity, to get some froth going behind it, which I think is very disappointing and really very unnecessary. But his words were pretty unsatisfactory. But I think it's time to move on from this.
Okay, let's move on to Njambi.
We have to decide whether this country is pro-free speech or not. Or is it just free speech when it suits others and when it doesn't suit others? For example, Lord Sugar was able to tweet asking his followers not to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. And yet he's got a very prominent show, which I must say I have watched quite a few times myself. And it's rather unfortunate, because then he is partisan and he said, vote for Boris Johnson.
So if you have rules, they've got to be applied across the board.
Well, this is it.
Yeah.
So we've got to agree that Gary has his own point of view. And that is his point of view. And because Lord Sugar can, put his points across, why can't Gary? Just because it's not going against what the government wants to hear. Yeah. But and this is it. The language that has been used about immigration has been quite alarming. An invasion. Suella Braverman said there was billions of people, and I had to actually go on Google to check how many billions are in the world. 8. So if these 8 billion people are making their way to Britain, I think we would feel the waves, actually. We would have a bigger problem.
I think even those who agreed with open borders might have a little issue with that. Christine, I've been astonished at how this story has dominated the news agenda over the weekend, and I'm quite glad that I wasn't on over the weekend so I didn't have to cover it, because when you think about all the other things that are going on in the world, and there's nothing that the BBC likes more than talking about itself, it has to be said. But when I saw last night on the 10 o'clock news, they led with this story over all of the other things that were going on. Something's gone wrong.
I think it was actually about much more than Gary Lineker and the BBC editorial guidelines. And as a former member of staff at the BBC, I had to follow the editorial guidelines, and I did.
I do too, not BBC ones, but LBC ones.
We have to follow editorial guidelines, and we all know people who've been criticised and got into trouble about them. But I think this was about much more. The BBC found itself in a terrible position, partly of its own making, but partly because of the chairman, Sharp, and his relationship with the Conservative Party. And that...
What's that got to do with this?
Well, what it has done is it has put a question mark in everyone's mind about the independence of the BBC, much more than Gary Lineker did with his comments. The impartiality of the BBC has been brought into question by the loan to Boris Johnson. And then
he didn't give a loan to Boris Johnson. He introduced someone to Boris Johnson.
But you can see where, in that circumstance, in any other company in the world, if someone has contact and arranges a loan for someone who is then
but he didn't arrange it. Now, words are important here,
yes,
Christine,
I know.
And you're using the wrong
Facilitated
ones.
Then.
Well, he didn't even... He made an introduction.
Okay, he made an introduction.
To somebody who was actually Boris Johnson's distant cousin.
I don't actually think that makes very much of a difference, because the important thing is that the implication that it created for the BBC was a lack of potential.
What about in 2000 or whatever it was?
And as soon as Gary Lineker was criticised for what he said, that was what came up. Now, the BBC handled it very badly initially and has handled it much better today. And I think now they have to have an independent look at the guidelines, because only by having an independent look can the BBC be protected. And that's the important thing.
So kick it into the long grass, put it out to an inquiry.
No, the inquiry has to have findings, and it has to come up with something about the guidelines, because unfortunately, it's not Gary Lineker was, if you like, a symptom of what people were beginning to feel. And they saw him being criticised, and immediately the BBC's impartiality, not Gary Lineker's, the BBC's impartiality was thrown into question. And I found that very difficult as a former member of staff at the BBC and someone who cherishes the BBC's position, not just in this country, but in the world broadcasting.
Pauline, the real problem here was when Ian Wright and Alan Shearer and all the other people rode in behind Gary Lineker and said, OK, well, if he's not going to be presenting Match of the Day, we're not going to do it either.
Well, that was certainly when it ceased to be a storm in a teacup and became quite a big argument. Though I have to say that if you're going to ask me in 2-3 days hence, I still reckon it's a storm in a teacup. But I think I'm actually the next governor.
I thought you were, but in case I got it wrong, I thought, well, I'm not going to say, but I had in my mind that you had something to do with the BBC.
Just two things about internal. I mean, it's inevitable that Sharp would be introduced into the conversation. He is, of course, a non-executive chairman, will have had nothing to do with any of the argument.
Would he not have even been consulted by the Director General at all?
Yeah, I'm sure he won't have been.
Do you think, well, what's the point of being chairman if you're not consulted over things like this?
Well, I should think there would be occasions. I mean, I don't argue that having that there is an embarrassment about Sharp, but I'm quite certain that given his position, he wasn't consulted. I'm sure this has been done by the Director. It is the Director General's job, and it is the guidelines.
But given
the guidelines are not good.
No, given the controversy here, is it not, given what Christine was saying, is it not the cleanest thing for Chops to just go and resign?
Well, he's going to. I mean, there's a report coming.
But this has gone on.
But do you not think it's inevitable?
I agree.
Do you not think it's inevitable that will be the outcome?
I'm not going to pronounce on this. I mean, that's.
I think we're all critical,
fair,
Ian, because this inquiry's gone on forever. It should have been over in 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
It should
and
not
it looks
be. It should not be. It should not be prolonged.
From the outside, it doesn't look good.
It's the perception that is the danger.
I'm not disagreeing.
And in a way, maybe this is going to lead to sort of independent appointments of the chair of the BBC, because it's not just the Conservative Party that's been embroiled. I mean, you think Gavin Davis. He donated hundreds of thousands to the Labour Party, I believe.
Exactly.
Right, we're running late again, so I've got to call this quits. We're going to move on in just a moment. It's 8:30. No. It's 8:33 on LBC. Let's go to the news headlines with Charlotte Morgan.
The Prime Minister has warned Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a more aggressive China is threatening to create a world defined by danger. Rishi Sunak says he's not blind or naive to the risks as he looks to secure a new deal on nuclear submarines with Australia and the US. The body of a man has been recovered from the scene of a suspected gas explosion in Swansea. 3 others are in hospital after it destroyed a house and badly damaged several others in Morriston. Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison for breaking bail conditions. The 78-year-old disgraced pop star, whose real name is Paul Gadd, had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. LBC weather, rain for much of the south tonight, scattered wintry showers in northern Scotland and a low of -5.
This is LBC.
.37. We have with us Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, Christine Jardine and Njambi McGrath and David Buik. Let's go to our next caller. It's Yasmin in Glasgow. Hello, Yasmin.
Hi, I'm a doctor and I earn £14 an hour. I live with my parents because I'm struggling financially to move out. Many of my colleagues and I are planning to move abroad for better pay and work conditions. What should the government do to stop UK-trained doctors from leaving the NHS?
How long have you been a doctor?
7 months now.
And how, I mean, I'm just asking because I think we'd all be interested in this. How quickly do you move up the pay scale as a junior doctor?
So when I start the second year of my work, I'll be earning about £15.15 an hour. When I start my GP training, I'll be earning about £18 an hour.
So if you work that out into, at the moment, you're on a salary of around £29,000 a year, which is about the national average. But it doesn't sound from what you're saying as though there's a very steep rise in what you're expected to earn over time. Because I had this conversation with Jackie Smith at the weekend because she chairs a hospital trust. And I said, well, how much do junior doctors earn? And she said, well, it depends. At the beginning, not an awful lot. And I said, well, I would expect somebody who's been a doctor for maybe sort of 10 years to be earning something like £70,000, £80,000 a year. And she said, no, they don't. And I think there is a bit of a misconception over what doctors earn, because GPs can earn that kind of money relatively quickly, I think, but maybe junior doctors not. Right, so the question is, what can the government do to stop UK-trained doctors from leaving the NHS? Christine?
Well, I think that the first thing we need to do, Yasmin, you're in Glasgow, so you're in the NHS in Scotland, but the conditions are very much the same. We have the same problems. The NHS is in serious trouble. And what the government should have done to avert the situation we're in at the moment, where we're facing the biggest strike by junior doctors who are threatening to go on strike for 3 days, is get round the table and find a solution. Because the working conditions for everyone in the NHS are appalling. The stress that they're under... For
everyone?
Yeah. Right across the board in the National Health Service, the people on the front line are working under immense pressure and have been throughout COVID. And one of the things that Yasmin has mentioned that I'd quite like to pick up on is she said, what can the government do to stop UK-trained doctors from leaving the NHS? Well, there is a simple thing that they could do, which is give all the people who are here on visas and who worked through the pandemic on the front line, give them indefinite leave to remain, so that having been trained in this country's NHS, and the people who are treated by it benefit from that training, instead of which they're making them pay for visas, and very often they're going abroad because they can earn more money, have better conditions. The NHS needs root and branch reform and improvement, but first of all, it needs the Secretary of State for Health to sit round the table with the unions and with the authorities and come up with a way of improving the standards and the pay that junior doctors are receiving in this country, because it is ridiculous that it hasn't been done so far.
Pauline, the junior doctors are asking for a 36% pay rise. Now, I thought the nurses were going some when they wanted 19%. What is the strategy here? Because they know they're not going to get 36% or anywhere near it, even if many people think they deserve it.
Well, I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, it doesn't strike me as enhancing their claim to nominate a sum which is just way out of the bounds of possibility. But I do agree with what's just been said, that we are losing doctors who are going abroad. I mean, not just people who come here to be trained, but also our own people born in this country are leaving. And I don't think it's a question of money. We are now spending in the UK and pretty much at the European average. And it's a question of organisation and how that money's spent. And so I do agree we do need change in the system. Far too much money, I think, spent on bureaucracy.
But
not enough on
a lot of people in the NHS say, can we please have a few years of stability? And you talk about root and branch reform, Christine. I mean, a lot of people say, anything but that, given the fact that we went through the Lansley reforms, etc., etc.
Yeah, I know, but if we don't do something soon, the situation in the NHS is reaching crisis point. I talk to nurses in my constituency and throughout the country, and the conditions that they are working in are terrible. Now, if the junior doctors go on strike, it's going to be worse than the nurses strike, because there's no minimum service level agreement there.
Again, we're back to, as far as I'm concerned, back to roots. Doctors have been paid a derisory sum of money for 50 years.
Not senior doctors.
I mean, consultants are not paid a derisory sum.
No. I'm talking junior doctors. And as far as I'm concerned, the National Health employs, I think, roughly 1.5 million people. They've got 30,000 managers. People think it's much larger than that. It's not. If anybody thinks that any political party can run the National Health Service efficiently, well, with everybody satisfied, dream on. It can't happen. It's got to be run on a basis of a business using mainly the public sector, but also the private sector. We just don't have the money. And if you don't have a plan that's something like 5 to 7 years on how you're actually going to sort this out, because there's no way that Stephen Barclay is going to be able to come up with anything more than 7 or 8%, or maybe 10% paid over 2 years or something like that, which is not really going to help them. And they are in a very dire situation. I just think, as Pauline has said, we need, and Christine have said, we need root and branch. We've got to have the drains up. We've got to go back to basics, start again. And how do you actually produce a national health service, or a health service, if you like, that everyone is proud of? And unless money is not the only problem, as you so rightly said, Iain, it's the question of the very poor management and the very poor policies that we've had. This is the trouble with, as far as I'm concerned, that with this country at the moment. You know, we talk about business. The government has no long-term plan what to do about it.
No.
National health, no long-term plan. You have to have a plan. They don't have a plan, and all of it is sticking plaster at the moment. Yeah. And it has to stop. And Wes Streeting, who I think is a very robust opposition spokesman, he thinks he can mend it for the Labour Party. He can't. It's not that big.
Well, that's just giving up, saying, well, it's there, there's nothing we can do to improve it.
No, we can do something about it. We have to have a joint venture between business and between the National Health as we know.
Try selling that to the general public. And Njambi?
It's a travesty. The NHS was a model to be admired by people around the world. The first thing that Jeremy Hunt did when he came into government was an attack on the junior doctors. Do you remember that? Yep, that was an attack on the junior doctors. That was the first thing that Jeremy Hunt did with renegotiation of the contracts. And how many years later, they are still attacking the junior doctors. Now, the thing is that the NHS was functioning before it became the news headlines. Every single day it was on the news since 2010. Now, it's a travesty for the country. It's not just me or you. Everybody loses out on the NHS. You have been able to, if you were to have a heart attack right now, your chances of survival in this country are extremely high. You would just go, you don't have to have money, it's egalitarian. And the moment you start introducing, especially the American model or other models around the world, they are massively unfair.
I don't think anybody's suggesting that.
Yeah. That's kind of what, I mean, we know that the private side of things doesn't really work very well either. If you look at the trains, how the trains are working, you know, it's chaos on the trains. So, somehow we have to have the will and the want to save the NHS, because it is, they say that you don't realize what you've got until you've lost it. Now, I know, and I've lived in different countries, and I know the value of the NHS, that literally you could have cancer today and your chance of survival is extremely good, because you can literally turn up and see the best doctors in the world.
But the trouble is, the chances of surviving if you have cancer are better in most other European countries than they are here.
Yeah.
That's the
health
problem
outcomes are
with that
better.
argument.
But we haven't actually answered Jasmine's question. How can we solve it today? And that's the problem.
We can stop playing politics. We are playing politics with the NHS, and that is the end goal is not for the benefit of the NHS, according to what has happened since.
But if you have a
2010.
finite budget, and obviously the government keeps adding to the NHS budget, but if you have a finite budget, it is for the NHS managers to decide how that is divvied up. And if they come to the conclusion that, well, we can only afford a 6% pay rise for junior doctors because, well, unless the government gives us more money, and if the government does give them more money, that has to also come from somewhere, doesn't it?
It's about priorities.
To governors to choose, as they say.
Well, yeah, it's about priorities. You know, if the government prioritizes on the actual health of its nation, then that would be the one thing they choose.
One of the things...
No, because Corey's I can't even think of the word now. Berating me in my ear, saying we've got to go to the break early. It's late. It's 8:47.
LBC.
20 past. It is 10 to 9 here on LBC. We have Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones with us, Christine Jardine and Njambi McGrath and David Buik. Let's go to Stuart in Nuneaton. Hello, Stuart.
Hello, Ian. Hello, panel. First-time caller.
Welcome.
Thank you. After parts of the HS2 project was delayed a few days ago, how should we go about making parts of the rail network we've already got actually work well?
Pauline.
Well, I come from the north, and I want to see the whole of HS2, which is sadly I don't think we're going to get it. I don't think we should have started to build it in the south. We should have started to build it in the north, where actually the need is much greater. I mean, the idea, that Birmingham really needs it, which is going to get it, and when you go further north, there are two problems. It's further away, and it's a capacity issue. Because once you're on the West Line, the West Coast Line, if there's a problem ahead of your train, you've had it, because there's one line only, and very crowded trains. And I use that line quite a lot. I come from Yorkshire, and Yorkshire's being discriminated against as far as I'm concerned. So I am, pretty fed up with what's happened.
Well, you were in the cabinet when this was commissioned, weren't you?
When you think of France, which has these high-speed trains all over the country, and we have one from London to Folkestone. Folkestone or Dover, and that's it. I mean, pathetic.
Why is it, Njambi, that in this country we don't have... Well, even if we have the vision for grandiose transport projects, apart from the Channel Tunnel, I'm trying to think of another one in my lifetime. I mean, when there was all that talk about Boris Island, the airport in the middle of the Thames Estuary, I thought, what a brilliant idea. And yet everyone's immediate instinct was to decry it.
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought it was a good idea. Yeah. It was birds with the problem.
So what do we do about the railways in about a minute and a half?
Of course, we need to improve the railways. Like, being a comedian, I have to travel across, all sorts of places, and I agree with you. It's incredibly expensive traveling on the train, and even if you want to be, ecological and not drive a lot, sometimes you just have to drive a lot. I was at the Hay Festival, and God, everybody made sure that I got onto the train. They said, if you miss this train, that's it. And you've got nowhere to stay. So there's a real argument for infrastructure when it comes to railways. And yes, obviously it's costly and expensive and everything. And I think the benefits will obviously be there. It's clear that there will always be benefits. But, people in the north, if, like you've said, when you travel up there, that's when you realise that, the luxury of the trains that we have done here is just another story. And the cost of it as well. It's incredible.
Okay, David.
I'm very much in Pauline's court, having spent some schooling time in Yorkshire, God's County, and that cross-Pennine...
No, that's Essex.
Terrible.
No, wrong.
Terrible.
Cross-Pennine, when you go through places like Rochdale, through to Keighley, through to Huddersfield, through Bradford, all the way through to York and to Hull, that's where it's at. And that's where we should be focusing. And this business of trying to speed up from London to Birmingham, tell me about it when I'm pushing daisies up in about 25 years' time. We don't need it now in terms
Only 25?
Yeah. Well, you can probably 10. But still, there we are. No, but on a serious note, Ian, it is the Pennine, the cross-Pennine. That is where the conurbation is. That's where you're going to get joined-up thinking for business. It's going to develop all kinds of opportunities. And I beg them to... The other thing we have to remember, and I don't think that Mr. Lynch was going to be listening too much, but lifestyle has changed.
He likes watching us, so he feels he's looking in the mirror.
Lifestyle has changed. People, against my better judgment, work from home for an awful lot. And the more we don't actually look at the way people are living to run the railways properly, the greater the problem's going to be.
Christine.
I agree with everything everybody has said. We do need more investment in the railways. We need more railways, not fewer. And we can disagree about where HS2 should go, where it should have gone. But I think the principle of having fast rail in this country, we would all agree on. I was born and brought up in Glasgow. I went to school by train. We went into town by train because Glasgow has a suburban railway network. It has a suburban underground. It has linked up transports. You don't take your car into town because it's unbearable. But so you take the train, and that's what we need throughout this country: is a much better organised railway system, transport system, and light rail now can introduce rail systems that are revolutionary light rail systems which can be used in rural areas, which can be used in the cities. We have the trams in Edinburgh, which people said at first, why are we having a tram system? It's going to be expensive. There were all sorts of objections, and now we all love it.
Yeah.
And, that is the way ahead. Okay. And to delay introducing more trains is a huge mistake, economically and environmentally.
Can I congratulate you for saying more railways, not fewer, rather than not less? Because less educated people might have done that.
Yeah.
Right, let's go to a text from Peter in Luton. Is 5 billion enough on defence spending, even close to enough to plug the gap brought on by Ukraine? Pauline Neville-Jones, former National Security Advisor.
Not by itself, no. I mean, it's a good start. 5 billion extra announced this evening, but we are going to have to spend more. And we are going to have to increase it.
But the Treasury were apparently quite happy to give 10 billion, but the Prime Minister said no.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Which is quite worrying, I think.
Well, perhaps he thinks, I don't know. I mean, I would have given Ben Wallace 10 billion, I must say. But whatever you give now, we are clearly going to have a bigger budget, and it's all three services.
But 3 billion of this is going on submarines. And 2 billion is to plug the gap left by Ukraine.
Why we need a bigger budget is because all three services need increases. We've got to open our manufacturing lines again, most of which are closed. We've got to supply ourselves with all the things that we've given Ukraine. We've got to open up the lines for ammunition.
Okay.
This is a big programme and a real step change.
We're slightly running out of time. Christine?
I think our whole attitude and our whole understanding of what we need in terms of defence has changed in the last year because of Ukraine. I think we are re-examining the whole...
China.
Yeah, the whole picture in the world, the international relations. And I think in that light, we have to look seriously at where we take defence forwards and how we invest, because it has changed the playing field for everyone.
Njambi.
I always find it really difficult talking about war.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about defence.
We're talking about avoiding war. We're talking about avoiding it.
Yeah, but part of the reason why we're depleted is because of the provision of ammunition to what's happening in the Ukraine. And I don't know. I think I will bow out of this one, but services all across have been gutted out. It's well known that even the army has barely got any provisions. So any money that is spent in, I suppose, creative defence.
30 seconds, David.
This is 2023. 5 billion is derisory. 15 billion minimum. And the world is in a very trying place. And if we don't start to realise it right across the spectrum in every single major country as a détente, then we are laying ourselves wide open to danger and criticism.
Right, final fund question from Dan in Bristol. Hope you think it's fun anyway. There were no shocking slaps at the Oscars this year. So, panel, if a film was made about your life, who's playing you? I'll kick off, shall I? Give you a few seconds to think about it. Bobby Ewing from Dallas. Because he has hair. Patrick Duffy.
Duffy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I always wanted to be an actress, so I'd want to do it myself. But failing that, you want the best person, so I'd want Meryl Streep.
Excellent. Pauline?
I've no idea. I've just no idea.
OK, David?
Well, I'm fat, bald, so it's got to be Rory Kinnear, isn't it? Rory Kinnear.
Rory Kinnear.
No, not Rory.
You mean the
father.
comedian?
His father,
Roy Kinnear, yeah. No, I vaguely remember him. And Njambi?
If Beyonce was an actress, then it would have to be her because she rules the world.
If you say so. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. Pauline Neville-Jones, Christine Jardine and Njambi McGrath and David Buik. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to go back to talking about the junior doctors' strike. They have put in a demand for a 36% pay rise. Can you justify that? If you're a junior doctor, I want to hear from many of you over the course of the next hour. Do you think this is a strategic error by the BMA, or do you think, no, that's what we've lost out on in wages over the past 10, 15 years. We want back to parity, just as the nurses do. But what are the effects of these strikes going to be? 3 days Lots of operations cancelled. Do the junior doctors enjoy the support of you, the great British public? 0345 6060 973. That's the number to call here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, I'm Charlotte Morgan. Disgraced paedophile pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison following a breach of his licence conditions. The 79-year-old, whose real name is Paul Gadd, had been freed in February after being jailed back in 2015 for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls. He's been closely monitored by the police and probation service in that time. A man's been confirmed dead following a suspected gas explosion in Swansea. The blast has completely destroyed a house and badly damaged several others in Morriston. 3 people are in hospital. Nicola lives nearby.
It's just catastrophic, really, for it to happen here, you know. But you could smell the gas. It was clearly a gas explosion.